Why Bruno? Galatasaray's plan, updated documentary. Something very interesting is happening between Manchester and Istanbul, and at first glance it looks like another transfer story. Galatasaray want Bruno Fernandes. Manchester United want to keep him. Huge numbers are being reported, contract discussions are taking place, and with every new report, the situation seems to change. But if we focus only on whether Bruno Fernandes will leave Manchester United, we miss the much bigger story. Because the real question isn't simply, will Bruno join Galatasaray? The better question is, why do Galatasaray want a player like Bruno Fernandes so badly? And why are they prepared to even explore taking the captain of Manchester United? Because this isn't really a story about one player. It's a story about what Galatasaray are trying to become. Galatasaray have reached a fascinating point in their development. Winning in Turkey is no longer enough. That doesn't mean the Super League has become unimportant. Far from it. Domestic dominance is the foundation of this project. But success changes expectations. Once you keep winning at home, eventually you begin looking outside your own borders. And for Galatasaray, that means Europe. They don't simply want another championship-winning squad. They want a team capable of entering the Champions League and causing serious problems for Europe's biggest clubs. And we have already seen glimpses of it. Big European nights in Istanbul, a victory over Liverpool, progress into the knockout stages, a stadium capable of creating one of the most intimidating atmospheres anywhere in Europe. But Europe has also exposed something. There is a difference between having excellent players and having a complete European team. That difference is where the Bruno Fernandes story begins. Look at what Galatasaray have already assembled. Victor Osimhen gives them an elite reference point at center forward. Leroy Sané provides speed, dribbling, and width. İlkay Gündoğan provides intelligence and experience. Lucas Torreira brings aggression and defensive intensity. Gabriel Sara gives them technical quality. Mauro Icardi brings goals and experience. There is already serious talent in Istanbul. So why Bruno? Because Galatasaray aren't simply looking for another famous footballer. They appear to be searching for a very specific function, someone who can connect everything. And Bruno Fernandes is one of the most aggressive creative midfielders in European football. He doesn't simply receive possession and move it sideways. He constantly searches for the action that changes the game. A through ball, an early cross, a switch, a shot, a set piece, a pass behind the defensive line. Sometimes that approach creates mistakes, but it also creates chances. And now imagine that behind Victor Osimhen. Osimhen wants to run. He wants to receive more space centrally. If the defensive line pushes forward, Osimhen attacks behind it. If they drop deeper, Bruno can operate around the penalty area. Suddenly, Galatasaray have several different ways of hurting you. That is why Bruno makes tactical sense. Players. That experience is valuable. And perhaps that's why Galatasaray's interest is so fascinating. They're not apparently targeting a player Manchester United are trying to get rid of. They're targeting their captain, a player United actually want to keep. And that brings us to the latest development, because the situation has now become more complicated. Galatasaray are reportedly prepared to make a very serious financial attempt. Reports have described a potential package reaching around 50 million euros, including add-ons. There have also been reports of an enormous 4-year contract that could significantly increase Bruno's earnings. But this is where we need to be very careful. At the time of recording, this is not a completed transfer. There is no confirmed agreement between Manchester United and Galatasaray. And reliable reporting has indicated that no official bid had yet been submitted. Manchester United's position has actually been the opposite. They consider Bruno indispensable. Their message is essentially, he's not for sale. And that makes this story much more interesting. Because Galatasaray aren't negotiating from a position where United are looking for a buyer. They would have to convince Manchester United to change their mind. And then they would have to convince Bruno. That second part may be even more difficult, because despite all the speculation, current reporting indicates Bruno's priority remains Manchester United. United and Bruno have been discussing a new contract. And now another twist has appeared. Reports emerged that Bruno rejected an initial proposal from Manchester United. Immediately, that sounds dramatic. Bruno rejects United. Galatasaray are waiting. The transfer is getting closer. But that's not necessarily what is happening. Further reporting has cautioned against interpreting the rejected proposal as Bruno deciding to leave. Contract negotiations are negotiations. Players reject first proposals. Clubs improve terms. Agents negotiate conditions, and discussions continue. So the important development isn't Bruno has chosen Galatasaray. There is no reliable evidence of that. The important development is Bruno's Manchester United future is now being actively negotiated while Galatasaray are trying to position themselves as an alternative. That is a very different story, and a much more interesting one. Think about the decision from Bruno's perspective. He's 31. He's captain of Manchester United. He's one of their most important players. He's spent years carrying enormous creative responsibility. So what would Galatasaray have to offer to make him seriously reconsider that? Money would obviously matter, but probably not money alone. They would have to sell him a football project. Come to Istanbul, play behind Victor Osimhen, play alongside Leroy Sané. Challenge for championships. Play Champions League football. Galatasaray want elite players to look at Istanbul differently. Not, why would I leave the Premier League for Turkey? But what could we build in Istanbul? That is a huge change in ambition. Manchester United, however, have an equally powerful argument. Why would Michael Carrick want to lose Bruno Fernandes? If you're trying to build a new Manchester United team, voluntarily removing your captain and primary creative reference point creates another enormous problem. Bruno gives you goals, assists, set pieces, leadership, availability, experience, and responsibility. You can sign another attacking midfielder, but replacing everything Bruno represents is much harder. That's why United's current stance matters. They aren't apparently asking, how much can we get for Bruno? They're trying to keep him. So for this transfer to actually happen, three things would probably need to change. Galatasaray would need to make an offer serious enough to test Manchester United. United would need to reconsider their position, and Bruno himself would have to decide that Istanbul represents the right next chapter. At the moment, we don't have evidence that all three are happening, which is why nobody should be calling this a done deal. But here's the most interesting part. Maybe Bruno Fernandes never signs for Galatasaray. Maybe Manchester United improve their contract offer. Maybe Bruno signs. Maybe Carrick continues building around his captain, and this entire transfer story disappears. But Galatasaray's problem doesn't disappear. They would still need the qualities they apparently see in Bruno. Creativity, leadership, chance creation, European experience, someone who can connect midfield to Osimhen, someone who can unlock a defensive block, someone who wants the ball when the game becomes uncomfortable. And that's why perhaps Bruno isn't the destination. Perhaps Bruno is the measuring stick. Because if Galatasaray cannot sign Bruno Fernandes, the next question becomes fascinating. Who is their Bruno Fernandes? Who else gives them those qualities? And that might tell us more about Galatasaray's transfer strategy than the Bruno story itself. There is also a warning here. Galatasaray cannot simply collect famous names. Bruno is 31, Gündoğan is 35, Icardi is 33, Mario Lemina is 32. Experience is valuable. But Champions League football also demands athleticism, speed, recovery, pressing, transition defense. If Bruno plays high, Sané attacks, and Osimhen stays ready to run behind, someone has to protect everything underneath them. That makes players like Torreira enormously important. It also means Galatasaray's squad and a serious European team. And ultimately, that is why the Bruno Fernandes story matters. Not because Bruno is definitely going to Galatasaray. He isn't. Not because Manchester United have agreed to sell him. They haven't. And not because Bruno has chosen Istanbul. There is no reliable evidence that he has. The story matters because of what the pursuit represents. Galatasaray already have United, could become another piece of that project. That tells you how Galatasaray see themselves. And perhaps more importantly, where they want to go next. They don't simply want teams arriving in Istanbul worried about the atmosphere. They want them worried about the football. They want opponents looking at Osimhen, Sané, their midfield, their bench, and thinking, this is no longer just a difficult away trip. This is a serious European team. Maybe Bruno Fernandes becomes part of that story. Maybe Manchester United close the door completely. Maybe a new contract ends the discussion. Or maybe Galatasaray eventually turn towards somebody else. But whatever happens next, the question remains. Not simply, will Bruno Fernandes join Galatasaray? But how far are Galatasaray prepared to go to return to Europe's elite? And if Bruno isn't the player who takes them there, who will be?